Lost comes down heavily on the side of determinism and fate, whether we like it or not. The time loop is the embodiment of this idea, that the past cannot be altered, and therefore the future is set in stone. But does that render the choices our characters make within that time loop inert? Do they have any choice at all? Or, are they merely chess pieces? This is a complex philosophical question, one that we are going to attempt to answer. Free choice comes down to a matter of perception. After all, Lost wasn't just about the nature of fate. It was about subjective point of view. Every episode would show us the unique perspective of a different character. Not just showing us their backstory, but also how they viewed the people and places around them whilst on the island. And how their past affected their present-day decision-making, and psychological behaviors. As previously discussed with Desmond, he could not have survived 3 years in the hatch pushing the button every 108 minutes, if it were not for a prior decade's worth of events and conditioning to prepare him for such a task. But fate does not preclude that our characters have no free will to make their own choices. It's just that fate already knows what choices they will make. Remember, time has no meaning within the source. Inside the light, everything is already past. It has already happened. Every choice has been made. Every life has been lived. And every death has occurred. Therefore, the island can see the tapestry of time in its totality. It knows which threads need to intersect. How they need to intersect. And when and where they need to intersect. It is the prime mover that ties all threads together. As a result of this, the island cannot de-interlace its own influence from how these threads weave together. It is both creating and sustaining its own existence simultaneously, and the existence of all things. Like a giant feedback loop. Which is why the compass is a perfect representation of this paradoxical conceit. In Lost, all life on Earth is part of this tapestry. Every single living thing is connected by it. And we all contribute to this constantly flowing stream of causality, in which every choice, no matter how big or small, leads to a consequence. Every action taken has a reaction. And every cause produces an effect. And this is happening every second of every day in every life, all around the world. Example: Jack's emotionally motivated decision to turn in his alcoholic father for medical malpractice ultimately leads to Sawyer shooting the wrong man. People's lives become so entwined with one another that it becomes impossible to separate the outcome of one life from another. You, as an individual human being, have no doubt affected countless numbers of other people's lives. Just from being in the world and interacting with it. Simply by existing. Every day you affect other lives, whether you realize this or not. That's why Jacob's tapestry is such a good metaphor. All of these threads weave together over time, crossing one another's paths, and creating a grander pattern that we, as individual threads, cannot see. Human beings have a subjective point of view. We see life on the ground through a perception of linear time. In that sense, our characters are absolutely making choices of their own volition, day in and day out. Every second of their lives. They just don't know it's part of this larger tapestry, or that, choice A, will lead them to, outcome B. And therefore, they must still reckon with those choices on a personal level. Regardless of whether or not they were destined to make them. Michael still decided to pull the trigger and kill 2 innocent women. That is something he has to reckon with on a psychological and spiritual level. As a conduit for the source, Jacob understands that whatever choice a character makes in any given situation, it will be the choice they were supposed to make at that time. Unlike the island, he doesn't always know what someone will choose to do. Only that the choice they make is what they were ultimately supposed to do. And this is what Jack is wrestling with at the lighthouse. It is why he gets angry and smashes the mirrors. And why he looks out across the sea to contemplate on the meaning of his own existence and life choices. Because he is trying to reconcile this very issue. He is probably thinking to himself, did I ever have a choice in anything I ever did? Did I ever have any control? Do any of my actions and choices matter? But we see that Jack does eventually reconcile these truths with who he is, and wants to be. He does not jettison meaning and purpose in his actions simply because he knows that the island has a plan for him. Destiny is not a get-out-of-jail-free card for morality or personal responsibility. It doesn't matter if every choice Jack makes was meant to be. Because he must still decide for himself what he does next. And by choosing what to do, or even what not to do, he takes complete ownership over his choices. And responsibility for his mistakes. In the end, he finally understands that these big and small choices he has spent a lifetime making for himself have all been part of something bigger. They have all led him purposefully to this moment. To fulfill his ultimate destiny. Saving the island, and saving the world. Perhaps he is thinking to himself, John Locke was right. Everything happened for a reason. There was meaning in every good and bad event that ever happened to him. Everything he did mattered. But this comes at the end of a very long chain of events. The island began a process of causality dating back thousands of years, with endless waves of cause and effect flowing down the river of time. As if the source had fired a starting pistol at the dawn of time, and the echo from that shot had continued to ring out across millennia, like gathering thunder. Which means that every single event, in even the most mundane of lives, throughout all of human history, was the result of this one shot. Your life, my life, everyone's life. It all contributes to the epic causal chain. And you don't have to be a candidate touched by Jacob to factor into any of this. The island has plans for us all. We are all part of its tapestry. Unlace one thread, and the whole design unravels. Let's take the real Henry Gale and use him as a demonstration of this idea. He was a man we never got to meet, and seemingly had very little impact on the overall mythology of the series. Yet he was crucial to everything. The real Henry Gale attempts to fly a balloon around the world in search of adventure. But the balloon gets sucked into the bubble of the island and crashes in a tree. Henry survives for a period of time, long enough to write a note to someone called Jennifer. And then he is murdered by the others. Most likely during Ben's reign, and possibly on his orders. Henry Gale's life led him to this crash. His death, initially, seems like a sad and meaningless end to what appeared to be a very interesting life. Yet his death served the tapestry of time. Because Benjamin Linus, the leader of the others, would later use Henry Gale's identity as an alias. And base his cover story around Henry's life after being caught by Danielle Rousseau. His capture leads to a series of causal events. The first is an introduction to several key characters who will feature prominently in Ben's future. Jack Shepherd, John Locke, and Saeed Jarrah. All three men will have large impacts on his life, both on and off island. And vice versa. As they argue over how to deal with Henry, and debate his true identity, it leads to a deepening of the conflict between Jack and Locke. A deepening hatred of the others from Saeed. And, ultimately, the corruption of a good man, and the death of two innocent women. The ripples from Henry Gale's balloon crash reach further still. Michael Dawson's actions lead him and his son to find rescue. But the guilt over killing these two women will eventually lead him on a U-turn back to the island to sacrifice himself. Which in turn will save the lives of the Oceanic Six. Because, had Michael not been below decks, freezing that bomb, then it is unlikely that Frank Lapidus would have taken off from the ship in time. Everyone would have perished, and none of them would have made it off the island. The Oceanic Six survived to make it home, primarily due to Michael's actions and his sacrifice. But they are eventually pulled back to the island, in part due to John Locke's death, but also thanks to the interference of Benjamin Linus. The man who originally masqueraded as Henry Gale, and whom they have all come to deal with in some way. And so the Oceanic Six return, and fulfill their destinies in the past of 1977. Then vanquish the Man in Black and save the world in 2007. And yet none of this would have been made possible had the real Henry Gale not crashed his balloon on the island and been killed. This chain of events would have never unfolded without Henry Gale's existence in the world. Although this chain does not begin, nor end, with Henry. Even the most minor character, or seemingly insignificant person, contributed to the cause and effect that is destiny. A businessman gets hit by a bus in a terrible accident. An unforeseen terminal illness strikes down a mother. A cold-blooded murder-suicide takes place at home. Seemingly random deaths of seemingly random people. Yet all have a lasting impact that set off the next chain of events. This is why the past could not be altered. Just one person's trajectory, even in a minor way, and Henry Gale never crashes on the island in his balloon. Which means, the causal chain is broken. The tapestry is undone. No amount of course correction could patch over the damage. Everyone is connected to the source, and everyone plays a part. This is a complex series of threads woven together throughout all of human history. And every thread serves a purpose. This is why determinism is an inescapable rule of the lost universe. But also, like Jacob says,
it only ends once. Anything that happens before that, it's just progress.
But here is the thing about fate versus free will. Does it matter if our choices are predetermined, if we don't know that they are already predetermined? Does it take away our sense of free will? Does it take away our sense of responsibility over our own choices, actions and inactions? Let's say that we definitely live in a predetermined world. Does that take away your internal sense of agency over what you decide to do today? Or what you plan to do tomorrow? Does that render the choices you make each day any less meaningful to you? Are you any less responsible for your actions in your own mind? Determinism does not and cannot undermine your first-person experience of time. What is free will anyway? How much of what you say and do is ever truly your own choice? How many of our behaviors are influenced and programmed by factors beyond our control? Think about the process of events that led to you sitting down and pressing play on this video. Think about what happened to bring you to this moment. Perhaps you had this video recommended to you by an algorithm based on other videos you watched. Those selections you made previously were presumably based on pre-existing hobbies and general interests that you have. Those interests were formed by your experiences in the past, possibly dating as far back to your childhood. Those formative years were likely guided and influenced by the people around you, both in positive and negative ways. Moments of elation, joy and wonder that ignited your passions. And moments of horror and hardship that impacted and traumatized you in various ways. This is where the ideas about yourself and your identity first began to form. And this is what underwrites every decision you ever make going forward through your life. Whether all of this was predetermined or not, in your mind, you made a conscious choice to be here. To watch this. To engage. You can take ownership of that choice. This is the way we have learned to live and to understand our own subjective realities. The consciousness of human beings is bound by linear time. We cannot see what lies within that electromagnetic light. We don't know how things will end for us until we get there. And we can never know if there is indeed someone, or something, behind the curtain. But what if the man of science had turned out to be right in the end, and not the man of faith? That would potentially mean that all of the misery our losties went through was entirely random. And all of their choices were simply determined by genetic, behavioral and environmental factors. Which means everyone who suffered and died did so for no grand purpose. Because there is no grand plan, no greater good, no deeper meaning, just free choice in a world of coincidence and happenstance. The man in black's final words to Jack in the end seem to mirror this outlook. He proclaims that Jack was about to die for nothing. That the world was all chaos and entropy. That nothing mattered at all. And there was no meaning or reason to the suffering. The man in black had an extreme, nihilistic view of existence. And not one that the show supported. Jack's role as a man of science, however, took a more balanced view on life, and is reflective of those in the world who place logic and reason above emotion and belief. This secular view of the universe and existence can still remain life-affirming because it embraces the idea that time is limited and life is short. And that there is no God or fate to fall back on. This is it. This is all there is. So, use it wisely. And be the best that you can be with the time that you have. There is no meaning beyond the struggle itself. Therefore, we must make our own meaning. Many people subscribe to this. And while this is a totally valid and logical worldview, this was not the final thesis of the show. Because faith is ultimately rewarded. Yes, good people suffer and sometimes die horrible deaths. While bad people prosper. Sometimes it is unjust and unfair. Other times the good guys win and the bad guys are punished. But in the world of theology and faith, and more importantly, in the world of lost, there is purpose and meaning to all suffering and pain. Every life and subsequent death has meaning. The island is a place where actual miracles happen. And a definitive afterlife exists in which all suffering ends and you can find your soulmates. Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse, and their entire writing team, decided that meaning doesn't come from individual choice in a random universe. At least not in Lost. They decided that the meaning comes from being part of something much bigger than themselves. That human action goes beyond individual choice. They ultimately sided with Locke's philosophy of the world. And Jack's character arc from man of science to man of faith is the evidence for this. I know this bothers some fans, particularly those who take a more atheistic or agnostic view on life. However, while the show does indeed validate John Locke's man of faith position, it also doesn't want us to be exactly like Locke. For all of his triumphs and confirmations, he remains a cautionary tale. His blind faith led him down a path where he was easily manipulated and misled. And it led to his ultimate ruin. His character arc, as tragic as it was, served a grander narrative and thematic purpose. Lost wants us to ask questions of our faith. It wants us to question our authority figures. Every time Locke went to someone for supposed answers, he only came away with more questions. And, as we peeled back the layers of this system of belief and its hierarchy, it became clear that no one really knew much at all. They all operated on notions of faith and mythology. The others often seemed like indoctrinated and radicalized members of a cult. At least, that is how the Dharma Initiative viewed them. The others speak about Jacob, a man they have never actually met, with incredible reverence. Yet the majority of them only know about him through myth and legend. Like an ancient prophet, the writers are clearly drawing a parallel between the others and organized religion. Of course, they have some justifications for embracing this mythology. They have seen the power of the island demonstrated to them, its healing properties, the power of the awesome force beneath the ground. They have also been conditioned by a sense of community and belonging. By that community's rules and its secrets. But, more importantly, they have been conditioned by a sense of duty and responsibility.
Who are you people? We're the good guys, Michael.
The others believe that they are here to protect the island. That they have been chosen because they are good people. They assume that Jacob himself has chosen them to be there, even though they may have really been selected by Richard, or whoever the group's leader is at the time. As a result, they labor under a delusion that they are better than any outsiders who come to the island apparently uninvited. In other words, they believe they are, quote-unquote, the chosen people. Even Jacob himself was a cautionary tale. A fallible deity. For all of his powers and mythological significance, he was ultimately riddled with his own shortcomings and insecurities. And, ultimately, he was a slave to a higher power like everyone else. How much were any of these events really his choice? Wasn't he also a disciple? A follower? He trusted his intuition, which originated from elsewhere. For his whole life, Jacob was guided by the source through all the smoke. And the mirrors. Perhaps this is why the ending of the series proved so divisive in certain quarters. For some fans, they didn't get enough concrete answers. Why couldn't Ben pull out that figurative dusty old book and start at the beginning? Meanwhile, other fans simply rejected the show's embracement of spirituality and emotion, seemingly over science and psychology. But I have always viewed the overall mythology of Lost as attempting to reconcile both faith and science together. For every mystical, supernatural occurrence, there is a scientific or science fiction-based interpretation underlining the magic. I believe my thesis on the show has clearly demonstrated this. So, I don't believe that Lost completely invalidates the man of science argument at all. As in real life, the science within the show simply hasn't found a way to fully explain the mysteries of the universe yet. For now, we will just have to settle for explaining the mysteries of Lost.